Welcome to the Inside Out Money Podcast.
Can't even recognize this place. Too many pieces of our past mistakes.
Hi, I'm Maggie, and I believe real change starts from the inside out. So let's work together to improve our money and our lives from the inside out. We will explore all things money and our relationship with it. Join me each week with a rotating set of co-hosts, friends, and interviews. Let's jump in.
This time, we going round and round and round and round and round.
Hi, Andrew.
Hey, Maggie.
I'm excited to talk about breakups today.
Yeah.
Yeah. I get an oddly large amount of questions around how to break up with your financial planner. It's almost like someone needs a pep talk to say like, hey, this is a bad setup, right? This isn't good for me. And they need to hear someone else validate them and say yes.
Yeah, it's like if you're in a relationship, if you're in a bad relationship, you want to get validation from your best friend about why you should get out of that relationship.
Yeah,
right?
except that's super awkward because you got to be careful when someone asks you about your opinion on their... I guess when they come and ask you for your opinion, that's okay, but you don't want to go in and just tell them like, hey, that's not such a great setup for you.
You got to make sure you read the room on that situation.
Exactly.
But think of this as you're coming to some friends on the internet and asking for some advice.
And I don't really read the room when I like tell someone that I think it's a bad idea. If they work with a commission-based financial planner, I'm usually like, I don't care what the circumstances are, it's a bad idea. So let's jump right in. First off, hello and welcome to the Inside Out Money Podcast. This is a personal finance podcast focused on breakups. Just kidding. We're focused on redefining wealth from the inside out. Every week, I speak with a rotating set of co-hosts about a different financial topic to help you improve your financial mindset and tactics. Today, we have one of your favorites. We were just discussing how Andrew is many people's favorite co-host. And this is like kids. I don't choose favorites. You know, I tell everyone they're my favorite when I'm with them. But we're going to discuss why you should break up with your financial planner and how to break up with them. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
You ready? We're ready for some breakup talk today. First off, I think we should clarify. We are mostly talking about commission-based financial planners, the type that charge a fee regardless of whether they make any money. It's not performance-based in any way. It's just a fee based on assets under management. Often it's 1%. And
it's kind of the market.
Yeah. That's
the going
kind
rate.
of the going
although
rate.
I've seen ones as high as 1.5 or 2, and I've seen ones as low as a 0.5 point.
Yes, they can vary. And sometimes they're a real person. Sometimes they're a fee charged by what Wealthfront, which is who I actually was a big fan of Wealthfront for a while because it's how I got started in feeling comfortable investing. And Greg and I actually just did a whole episode 52, about simplifying our finances and why and how we were moving away from robo-investing and how much money we were going to save from that. And that's just 0.25%, which is what Wealthfront charges. But there's also a lot of other, I'm not even sure if you'd call them robo-investing, but like advisory services that are part of your 401k provider or part of your brokerage where they offer some level of guidance and recommendations, and they may charge like 0.5%, like you said, Andrew, or as low as Wealthfront's 0.25%. But we don't think you should be paying this fee, and the costs really add up over time. And we can get into all the other reasons why we don't think you should be paying it.
Yeah, so coming to our reasons why we both feel very strongly about this, and I think for me it really comes down to simplicity. And you need advice on things that are really complex that you don't know much about, right? And so plumbing, for example, like I'm not getting involved in the plumbing or the electrics of my house, or you need surgery, you want to go hire a doctor, hire a doctor and get some good advice, right? But and we've outlined this, right, on one of our episodes that you can link in the show notes, right, what we call the simple path to wealth and investing. And if you look at these concepts, they're really simple. It's spend less than you make and invest the difference in low-cost index funds. That is the secret sauce. This is not a super complex thing.
Yeah.
And there are definitely aspects of personal finance that can get very technical, like how do you want to do a backdoor Roth IRA, or, should you be putting stuff into a 401k or a Roth 401k, or there are all those small little things. But at the end of the day, if you just follow some very simple tactics for investing, which is starts with spend less than you make and then invest the difference in low-cost index funds, you're there. There's nothing else that really needs to be done. You can make it super complex, but you don't need to.
Yeah. And I often think like when you're debating those finer points of like, well, should I put it into a Roth 401k or a 401k? Either one of them is a good decision. So you're already 90% of the way there. Yes, you could do a final 10% of optimization, but if you're maxing out either one of those, you're doing 90% of what you need to be doing.
Right.
And then if you're investing that in an index fund, which again, we have entire episodes where we focus on nothing but that. And some examples are Episode 3, how and why to invest in index funds. Episode 39, what's in our wallet, the specific index funds accounts and more that Andrew and I both have. So we get into the details of that if you want to check those out. But ultimately, like, I think you're spot on, Andrew. It's not that complicated. And there are times, and actually, that's actually why I once used Wealthfront. It was the very first investing I did when I was around 36 when I opened that account. And it was because at the time I thought it was complicated. And some other people, actually financial planners, ironically, made it seem really complicated to me.
That's a key point, right? Is the industry has done no favors to the average person, right? Is they, in order to justify the costs and the fees, they have made things unnecessarily complex, which is actually the exact thing you don't want to do. And we've talked about this so many times, how it's very difficult for advisors to outperform the market, and by putting things into complex structures, they're actually hurting your performance than simply putting it into broad-based index funds, right?
Yeah.
If you went to an advisor, just say you had $100,000 to invest, right, and they're going to charge you a 1% fee, so you're going to pay them $1,000 a year, right, to invest, to manage that money for you. And if the advisor just said to you, well, yeah, I'm just going to put it in the S&P 500 and I'll send you an invoice for $1,000, right? Like, you're not going to feel very good about that, right? So
and you're young, so I'm going to let it ride for the next 30 years. Right?
In order to justify that fee, well, I got to come up with some complex hedging strategy, and we're gonna pick stocks because I believe them, and AI is super hot, so we gotta be investing.
We're gonna
in
do
all
some
these
tax
AI
loss
stocks
harvesting,
right now.
and I'm not knocking
right.
that, but that's in the 10%. That's in the final 10%.
You can throw out all these different strategies, and at the end of the day, it's just adding unnecessary complexity. So
yeah, and you said this, Andrew, but it's worth double clicking on. Historical data shows that the average financial planner cannot outperform the market. So putting your money in the S&P 500 as an example will make you more money than individual pick. There's a Motley Fool stat that says less than 10% of active large cap fund managers have outperformed the S&P 500 over the last 15 years. So again, their job is to make you think that they're adding value, but ultimately data and history shows us that overall market returns, the average market returns, beat an individual portfolio the majority of the time.
And just imagine if a financial advisor was out on the street marketing that they can't beat the market. How many people are going to sign up for that, right? Whereas, most advisors and most, finance professionals are advertising that they have outsized returns, that they can beat the market. And I've said this many times is I don't care about beating the market. I don't want to underperform the market, and I don't want to beat it. I just want the market returns. And so the only way to guarantee that is, by definition, you can't get the market returns if you're using a fee-based advisor, because you have to cover their fees. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, so the fee alone eats into it, on top of, even if you take the fee out, the data still shows it's not just the fee that's causing the underperformance, but the fee is significantly adding to the underperformance because you're right off the top giving up 1%. So speaking of that, Andrew, going back to the cost point, some of my favorite images on this are put out by Personal Finance Club. And I'm a big fan of not recreating something. If someone's done it well, let's reference that.
Yeah, definitely shout out to Personal Finance Club on Instagram. They do a great job. I'm a big fan of.
They got beautiful visuals and charts, and they're really good at taking something that could be more complex and simplifying it in a tiny square visual on Instagram. You can also access them on their website. We actually put a link in the show notes to some of these on their website, so you can go look at them yourself. So let's take this from a couple of different angles. So one of their visuals, it does include, it shows a 2% fee, which is, again, I think on average, you'll see more people at the 1% mark, but for the sake of their visual, it's a good one. So they're comparing $10,000 invested in the S&P 500 over the last 40 years to the same investment that incurred a 2% annual fee. So they're showing if you had been in the S&P 500 with your financial planner and without your financial planner, so assuming apples to apples in terms of overall performance, which, by the way, data doesn't support. So data supports that actually there's a hit on the performance because you can't outperform the average. Not that you can't, but on average, fund managers don't outperform the average. The difference in your growth over 40 years is 55% of the investment. So that 2% fee eroded 55% of the investment. So I don't have the exact math on if that had been 1%, but your $10,000 invested over the last 40 years would have turned into $652,000 after 40 years if you weren't working with a financial planner and just left it in the S&P 500. With that 2% fee, because of the lack of compound interest you're getting every year, because you're losing 2% a year, that same amount of money invested would have turned into only $296,000 after 40 years. So that is that it eroded 55% of what you could have earned.
Of the gain.
Of the gain.
Yeah. That's massive.
That's huge. And so I often hear, and I have like a really good friend who works with a financial planner, and I've heard this from so many people. They're like, oh, this was my dad's guy. This is my friend. It's my uncle's friend. It's like a friend of the family. It's someone they've been using for a really long time. And I'm like, cool. Is that person worth a few $100,000 to you over the next 10, 20 years?
Yeah, I mean, there's the psychological component here, right? That people use to justify it themselves internally. Because, all right, say that, let's just use average annual returns of 8% going forward, right?
Yeah.
In somebody's mind who's working with an advisor, and there's it's called a 1% fee, right? In their mind, they're like, well, they can get 10%.
Yeah.
And so I don't mind paying the 1% fee because they will outperform the market.
Yeah, it's worth it.
So it's very easy to justify. And obviously every single, financial advisor is going to use that same logic.
And somebody out there might get 10%. I'm not saying
Absolutely.
it's impossible.
There are plenty of people who do,
but the average person
the market
does.
over a shorter period of
Yeah.
time, right? It's the shorter period of time. It is extremely hard to do over decades. Sure, you can find tons of people year to year that will beat the market, and then they use those performance gains to easily, you look at the data around mutual fund inflows and outflows, right? You have a hot fund that's crushing the market. They have all kinds of inflows, right? Because everyone is chasing that performance. And so the fees, people don't care about the fees. If you're crushing the market returns on a temporary basis, no one cares about the fees, because psychologically it's like, well, it doesn't matter to me because I beat the market. But the problem with that logic is, can you consistently outperform the market over decades to then justify the fees? That is what is so difficult.
Yeah. And even if, again, do you feel it's worth, depending on the amount of money you have invested, we're not just, you gave the example of $1,000 a year, but I'll take another personal finance club visual of showing someone who pays an hourly advisor, like a fiduciary advisor, $150 an hour, and meets with them twice a year to review and kind of, rebalance or whatever they want to talk about their finances. Over the course of 40 years, they will have paid that person $12,000 if they're paying hourly for, and again, it's 2 hours a year, so that's a small amount, but let's, average that out. That's actually probably about right of what somebody might want if they were going to pay someone hourly for support, which, by the way, I don't have a problem with paying someone hourly for support.
Right.
I think it can be a very good investment.
100% agree with that. And I think that's like the big difference here is the industry loves the assets under management model.
Well, there's an entire industry built on it.
The entire industry is built on it, right? Because it's such a profitable model.
Yeah.
And I 100% support people using fiduciary financial planners that are fixed hourly and that can provide advice on some of the more tactical things. If everyone's situation is unique, right? We've talked about that, but going beyond what we consider, you can get 90% done with very simple approach. If you wanted to discuss something that's more complex, or you want to do some estate planning, or things that you want to bounce, you got a retirement plan, you're thinking about early retiring, and you actually want to bounce your plan off of somebody to get a second opinion, that's a fantastic idea, right? So we fully support that. It's the traditional, which I would think is it's the traditional Wall Street model of assets under management that is
no bueno.
that is sucking people dry from the fees,
and the people who arguably can't afford to be sucked dry by those fees. But so going back to that example, right? That person who paid someone hourly twice a year over 40 years paid out $12,000 for financial advice. Someone else who is getting charged 1% for assets under management over 40 years, and this is based on the math of they invest $500 a month over 40 years. They paid in fees $711,000. So over $700,000. So that's where I say, like, when you have someone where you're like, oh, this is a friend of the family or whatever, I'm like, cool. Do you want to pay them $700,000? That could be your entire kind of the difference between you working another 5 to 10 years or you being able to retire younger, or I mean, just everything, like your livelihood in retirement. And it's a lot of money. So look, we've made the point. We're not a big fan of this. And hopefully that's helpful on why. I think we can shift to if you're like drinking the Kool-Aid that Andrew and I are drinking, which is delicious, by the way, and Andrew makes it himself, he doesn't buy the brand name Kool-Aid, he's got his own mix up for it. That's funny if you listen to the episode of things we don't spend money on. If not, you have no idea what we're talking about. And Andrew does not make his own Kool-Aid. But you agree, and you might be working with a financial planner and you want to break up with them. So let's talk about what that process looks like, because it's not difficult. It's actually a pretty easy transition. The most difficult part perhaps is like just getting past the headspace to like go and do it. And we should give a quick disclaimer here, Andrew. We are sharing our opinion. This podcast is for entertainment purposes.
We are not financial experts.
We are not financial experts. We do co-host a financial podcast together, and we think we know an awful lot, but this is for entertainment purposes. This is our opinion. This is what we believe in, and you should consult an hourly financial coach, planner, fiduciary, etc. if you want to look at your individual situation. But moving on, so we're now saying, like, how do you actually break up with this person, right? You're working with someone, it's a direct person you have a relationship with, or it's through the brokerage that you use for some of your funds, whatever it might be. You just do it. You break up with them, right? That's the first piece of advice, and we'll get into like what that actually looks like. You certainly would want to look at any sort of contract or notice period required, but there shouldn't be one. I mean, there's some like legal restrictions on this, but there really shouldn't be any sort of time period on it. But you should go look at your initial letter of engagement or your initial contract, because there could be something funky in your setup where you're signed up through the end of the month or something like that. In some cases, you wouldn't even need to notify them. I believe you should, though. It's the courteous thing to do. There could be someone where like you're working with somebody, through Fidelity, for example, and you do have one of their managed programs, and you could just transfer all your money out of Fidelity overnight, and like they'd sort of be notified through the system and not through you directly. But I don't even recommend that. I think the courteous thing to do is if you actually have been working with a real person and you know them and you've talked to them, you should let them know that you've decided to change course. And I personally think you do it in writing. Don't get on the phone with someone, because they're salespeople, right? They're like, they got a retention department for you, right? They're going to convince you why you need to stay. Yep. They're going to work hard and they're going to confuse you. I actually know we gave some advice to someone around this years ago, me and someone else, and I saw their response back and I was like, wow, they're really trying to confuse you on why you should stay in this relationship. And that makes me want to get out even more. It would make me want to get out even more, right? Because it's just, It doesn't feel good. So literally like write an email, right? Most of the time you're probably communicating via email anyways on many things. Write an email, and we will put a specific script in the show notes in case it's helpful for you to leverage and customize. But I'll give you an example of how simple this email could be. Dear so-and-so, it's not me, it's you. I'm just kidding. Don't say that. But dear whoever this is, I hope this email finds you well. I've been out of the email game for a couple of years. So, how do you start off your emails these days, Andrew?
That's a good question.
Hope you're doing well. Something like that.
Yeah.
I always like to throw that in. And I meant it sincerely. Hope you're doing well. I want to express my sincere appreciation for the assistance and guidance you have provided over the past X years, fill in the blank.
Hopefully that's not 30 or 40.
Yeah, hopefully it's like 3 months. After careful consideration and advice from Andrew and Maggie, don't put that in. After careful consideration, I've decided to no longer use your services. As of, name a specific date if you need to. I would like to terminate your financial advisory services on my account. Please let me know if there are any pending transactions or outstanding matters that we need to resolve prior to this termination date. And please provide me with any instructions on how I can retrieve my financial data and records post-termination. Thank you again for your support, and I wish you all the best in the future. Sincerely, fill in your name. It's that simple. You just write a note. This isn't like a long, this isn't like a, I don't know. In some cases, it might be a more personal relationship that you want to, do it in person. And that's a judgment call on your part. But my advice is like, be professional, express your gratitude, keep it concise, keep it short, and just do it.
And they will 100% try and stop you.
I believe they will. My guess would be 80 to 90% of the time. Sorry. That's part of my thing is do not give a reason why, because that opens the door for them to, they're going to probably come back anyways. Not always, but I think you're right, Andrew. The majority of the time, my gut would be they're going to come back and try to let you know what you're going to be missing out on and want to meet
and
to review your concerns.
Justify the services they provided, and some may look to cut you a break on the fee, right? Yep. They'll offer you, hey, we're going to lower our fee from a point to 3/4 of a point.
Right. And so, and then you can be like, cool, that $700,000 you're going to cost me over the next 30 years just became $600,000. I still don't want to do this.
Right.
And so I don't even think you need to give a reason why. It's your business and you can change it at any time. But just be prepared that they are going to go through all the reasons you should stay. This is just like any relationship. And they're probably going to confuse you with things and mention things that you haven't considered and ask you questions that are going to put you on the defense and make you feel like you maybe don't understand everything and make you start to question your own decision. You don't need to. Like, this is as simple as letting them go and moving your things into basic index funds. And again, go listen to episode 3 and go listen to episode 39 that Andrew and I both did together if you want to hear more specifics on what to invest in when you're no longer working with your financial planner.
Yeah, that sounds like a good plan.
Yeah. I also think it is worth mentioning that once you break up with them, there is a process of potentially needing to switch brokerages. So you might work with someone through Merrill Lynch and you really only were with Merrill Lynch because of that financial planner. And you may decide you want to move your funds over into like Vanguard or Fidelity. And that's a personal decision. We're not going to get into all of that in today's episode. But if you did want to do that, Greg and I actually recorded an episode recently where we talked about making the transition from Wealthfront to Fidelity and moving all of our funds over. And it was episode 52 called Simplifying Our Finances. The first step is your stuff will stay at whatever brokerage you're with. It just will no longer have that financial planner attached to it. And there sometimes is a little bit of a process associated with that, but it's mostly behind the scenes. And otherwise, you can choose to just keep that stuff where it is. And then they may have you in a bunch of things you don't want to be in, though, which is, again, what Greg and I kind of talked about in that Simplifying Our Finances episode. But the first step is all your stuff will just transfer over in kind if you do decide to switch brokerages as part of this. Or you just stay with the brokerage that you were already with that planner, and you just no longer have, that planner's support, if that makes sense.
Yep. So maybe we just talk a little bit about they didn't have you in an index fund, so you've got to make some decisions about how you, if you want to go on the broad-based index strategy, you have to then evaluate your current portfolio and how you go about transitioning that to a broad-based index fund strategy. And with that comes, you've got to evaluate taxes and all that, right? So
yeah, and your reference to taxes is you might, and you can't just, if it's within your 401k, the good news is you can change all that stuff with no tax implications. And again, we go into this in more detail in a previous episode 52, but if it's within your brokerage, it's going to trigger a taxable event. So there may be there will be capital gains or capital losses depending on what you're trying to change it to.
If you've made this decision and you want to then figure out how to transition to the index fund strategy, it's best to consult with a tax professional in order to make sure that you have a solid tax strategy to as you migrate from whatever they had you in, whether it was individual stocks, whether it was bonds, whether it was mutual funds, right? And what is the best way to go about transitioning to a broad-based index fund strategy?
Yeah, I think that sounds great. And I will say too, I can't give a full personal plug for this because I haven't used it myself. But since we referenced Personal Finance Club, earlier this year, they actually launched a new business product called Nectarine, which is basically a marketplace for finding fee-based financial planners. I've heard some really good reviews on it. I also heard some people say that some of the people that were in it, on the fee-based financial coaches and planner ends, were kind of just trying to get leads to get them into a fee-based situation. So be careful of that. But you are still paying for hourly advice, and you can still get hourly advice. Just don't let them suck you into that as, step one of getting you into a fee-based situation. But that's a good starting point if you do want to talk with someone, and if you want to easily find an hourly fiduciary to help you with any of that rebalancing or anything else through a transition like this. But the net of this is we don't think there's a lot of benefit from working with a commission-based assets under management financial planner. And we hope this has given you a little bit of a nudge to understand the steps that might be involved in breaking up with someone and moving on to buy and manage your own index funds.
Good summary.
Yeah, keep it simple. Okay, on that note, we'll keep this simple. So we appreciate you guys listening. We know your time is very limited and valuable. We appreciate you spending some of it with us. If you have enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you want to give us a written review on Apple Podcasts or a rating on Spotify. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for everyone who's recently left some reviews. We also encourage you to share this episode with a friend or family member to encourage ongoing discussions about money. You can also subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have thoughts or questions, we'd love to hear from you, and you can leave a voicemail or text us at 404-981-3370 or hit us up on Instagram.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Maggie.
Bye.
Bye.
We going